Welcome to Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere with your host, Chris Parker.
And welcome back to Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere. This is Chris Parker, and I am absolutely delighted to have Sonia Lewis, who is the CEO and visionary of Ascribe Educational Consulting. And she's coming from, well, close to my old territory back in California, but more from the northern half than where I'm more from the southern half. And the reason I'm just so delighted is the work that she's really dedicated her life on, and we're going to get into some of the backstory of that and what she's doing, is so incredibly meaningful. And I've really invited her to give me a short course on what is racism and anti-racism, and I'm really looking forward to some of her tips that maybe we can all bring into the workplace, literally around the world, about to make the world just a little better, a little more beautiful, and a little more diverse and safe for everyone. So, Sonia, thank you so much for joining. Can you just kick it off with us and share us with what is it that you're doing and why are you doing what you're doing?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Chris. I so appreciate the platform, your audience, and those who are listening in to conversations about just being in business and working in community in the world. I started an educational consulting business just a little over a decade ago. I am a former high school teacher, go figure. But I knew going into education that I would not retire a teacher. And so I knew that at some point I would have to figure out what that thing is. Never, ever, ever did I imagine becoming a business owner. Like I never would have thought that I would be running a business and that it would be 10 years later and I'd be still here doing it. So it's been definitely a whirlwind. It's been a pleasure and joy to see the growth pains and the booms like we're experiencing now. And it's almost unfortunate, but I am very pleased and delighted to be a conduit for change in this moment as the boom is happening. And so I consider my job anti-racism work. I specifically, when I introduce this work, I say that I am an anti-racist impact strategist. And so if you think about anti-racism as a concept, how do we want to impact things, and strategizing around finding solutions, action-driven solutions is the core of my work. There are a lot of whys, and they start back from childhood and who my family landscape is. But at the core of me, I've always known that educational equity was super important. And I can tell you two stories that lend to how I got there. One, I was 7 years old in the second grade, and we had just done an activity on the Statue of Liberty. And I was tested GATE and gifted probably in kindergarten. I had been reading since about the time that I can speak. And so I was actually in a third grade class, but getting credit for the second grade. And so I decided that I wasn't going to say the Pledge of Allegiance because the last line said liberty and justice for all. And I understood liberty to mean something. And I was a very literal girl. And I got into a lot of trouble, behind it. This was in the mid 70s. And it was not an easy choice to do, but I learned early in life to stand on your convictions, and I definitely stood. And I think I ultimately won. I won courage, right? I grew up in a household where my mom grew up in the projects of Chicago, and she said she was going to find a place that was going to be better for her to raise a family. My father grew up in the country fields of Texas, picking cotton as a kid. And so the two of them met in California. And the backstory to how I think am so outspoken about certain things in life, even if they're challenging, is the fact that my dad, after the Vietnam War, became one of the first 5 officers to integrate the police department in the city we lived in. And my mother dibbled and dabbled, so to speak, in the Black Panther Party. She attended meetings. My dad, unfortunately, on the job was asked to spy on the Black Panthers. He found that a conflict of interest on many, many levels. And he refused, and he was fired for it. I will tell you that as a kid, I never saw my dad in a police uniform because he was very conscious of what that message would send to his community, and he didn't feel that they were ready for it. And so that's like a little bit of my backstory. And you can see over the years as I've now arrived in my 50s, and it has just built on this sense of equity and what does it really look like. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you, Sonia. We're going to go way off the business script, I think, here. How has racism affected you? Meaning, are you doing this for what you saw in your parents' experiences, or what you're seeing in other people's experiences, or your own, or all of the above? Like, how has this triggered something alive within you?
I would definitely say it's all of the above. So one of the other reasons to why I made the decision not to say the Pledge of Allegiance, I was overhearing my dad come home and tell this story about one of my cousins who was literally, when I say he was an adult, but he was really a kid at heart and in his mind. He had developmental challenges, but he was the biggest, best kid to play with. He was the best park buddy, the best piggyback ride giver, just all around like a joy, the best laugh, the best smile. But he was, 6'4", almost 300 pounds. And he was back then, this was WWE Wrestling Academy. He wanted to be the next Hulk Hogan, but developmentally, he could not, have managed being in that world. And he had gone in with to this boot camp wanting to win all of his matches. And then he didn't understand when the director would tell him, you can't win this match. He was like, well, you're supposed to win. And so developmentally, he just didn't get it. And I think that set him in a little bit of depression. But my dad, I overheard telling the story of when the police killed him in the middle of the street. And he was in his underwear and he was in a manic stage. And he felt like there was no reason. And I literally cried myself to sleep that night. I didn't tell my parents that I overheard the story, but coupled that with the lesson that I was learning on, the Statue of Liberty. And I was like, that's not what happened to my cousin. And what can I do? And it's really, I felt like helpless. And so that's add that to that mix of things that's swirling around in my mind. And I don't know that I could have articulated as it being racism, but I know that as I continued in life, one of the things that I will never forget, Miss Bill, you said to me as a second grader, she said, I thought you were better. You were one of the good ones. And so I didn't know, that back then as a 7-year-old, I didn't know what that meant. I just was like, okay, she thinks that I'm smart. But that kind of language followed me throughout my educational career. I can remember a high school instructor that I had. He was my academic advisor. And I was in this, quote unquote, the smart kids program. And he said to me, you are practicing reverse racism because I've made some recommendations for you to get into Stanford and Berkeley and UCLA, and you're going to choose to go to a historically Black college. And I was like, are you kidding me? And my mom, she almost went ballistic. But so
reverse racism, is that a thing?
Is that a thing? That is not a thing. It is definitely not a thing.
Okay.
But my mom really went ballistic because, one of the reasons that I chose to attend a historically Black college was because it was part of my family lineage. My great-great-great-grandfather was the Spelman College that I eventually attended was founded in the basement of his church. And so my mom didn't get an opportunity to attend Spelman, and she just impressed on me throughout the years, this is an opportunity and I would love for you to attend. I wish that I could have. And so it was on my goal, my vision board was Spelman College.
Yeah.
And so those are examples of racism. Now that I look back, I can identify them as racism. But the implicit biases, the gaslighting, the microaggressions are things that I've had to experience and endure as an adult in the career world, in community. I can tell you that as people in my local area recognize me when they see me in the store. I had an older white gentleman and his wife. I'm assuming, I don't know for sure that her lineage was Asian, and they were in a Costco, and we were just walking down the same aisle, and I heard him say, something along the line of, "There's that Black woman who's always talking about our town is so racist." And this was at the height of, the Black Lives Matter movement here in our city. And his wife said, "You can't say that in public. People will hear you." And so I literally followed them around the store and was like, "Yep, I'm her. Yes, I'm her." And they left the store. They were so embarrassed and they left the store. But so, yes, I would say that I witnessed my parents experience things, other family members experience things, and then personally, absolutely.
We will get to the education services that you have. What's alive in me right now is something that happened not long ago, and maybe you can just help me wrestle with it, because again, as a white male working, and organizations all over the world are wrestling with diversity. And in one way I appreciate it, but then the other hand, I don't know what to do with it, because it's been on multiple occasions like, "You're perfect for this project, but we would rather have a female Asian consultant. Sorry." And you're like, "Well, amen. Yes." But then you're like, "Well, no." like societally I say yes, but then I need to eat, so there's this, how do you rationalize that? I just wrestled with it and basically concluded with what I just said is like, societally, this needs to happen, and absolutely, I will have other opportunities. And so move on and not really, but I do remember that there was this emotion. It was an emotion within me of like, I don't know what's right and wrong. How do you reconcile history and what's going on, and then the real human aspects from all these different things? Do you have some wisdom there?
Absolutely. There is a human aspect in there that we have to recognize, and we have to sit with ourselves when those triggers and emotions bubble up inside of us. I tell people in my trainings to do a couple of things. Like, we have to, one, acknowledge that racism is a real thing. First, that the construct of race is made up. Right. And so if we understand that this is this was a ploy, a system that was designed so that one group of people could have more benefits to the laws than other people, let's start there. Right. And if we can agree that racism is a fake thing, and that, yes, we come from different places around the world and we have different ethnicities, but race, the construct of race in and of itself, is very much made up. It has been a design for control and for power, influence, and money. So starting there, right? And then if we can accept that race is made up, then we can also accept, or I challenge people to acknowledge that racism has impacted negatively with trauma and oppression certain people around the globe. And that certain people around the globe, they typically are of a darker hue. Can we agree with that, right? So I lead people through these conversation pieces. And typically when I ask that question, most people in the room, about 70 to 80%, will say yes. And then I will dig in just a little bit deeper. Can you acknowledge that the system that you've worked in has perpetuated racism towards certain people? When you think about leadership positions, when you think about women in the workplace, how much are they paid compared to men? When you think about people who are of color, Black, brown, indigenous, how much are they paid? Are they in positions of power, right? So we think about the levels in our work systems. And then most people still say, yeah, I see that. And then I dig a little bit deeper and I say, have you as an individual perpetuated and, helped continue the conditioning that racism is okay? And people struggle with that because it's now a personal reflection. And I then offer this, like, we're not talking about, Chris, you are a racist because you are a slave master, right? We're not saying, Sonia, you are feeling the heat of racism because you are enslaved. We are saying that this system has impacted our history, and we haven't done anything for 400 plus years to change that. And so I'm not fighting Chris, the individual. I'm not challenging Chris, the individual. I'm challenging the system. And as a matter of fact, Chris, you are so super important in the challenging of the system because you have privilege and benefit from the system. And so that's the kind of conversation. And most people have like this aha moment, like, I didn't think of it from that perspective. This is the benefit that you receive because of our founding fathers, and the founding fathers of America had this spread of impact all around the world. So capitalism and colonialism happened every place, nook and cranny around the world. And so all globally, you can see people who are of darker skin tone be treated differently, regardless of the place that you're from. And so that is, the approach that I take in the workplace. I also tell people that none of us have all the answers, right? We will arrive at moments of reckoning and have some reconciling in ourselves as we reflect on the possibility of change. And then secondly, as we're not fighting individuals, we're fighting systems. We just have to continue to acknowledge and not make the labor of the process be on those who have been mostly impacted. And when people begin to say, okay, Google is my friend, and I can go and Google some things and not make my friend, that someone that I care and love about, do the heavy lifting when it comes to this work.
Yeah, there is a societal level and a human level. And myself, last week, because I'm working with an organization as a consultant and we're hiring some people, I explicitly asked the recruiter for more females. And for me, that is that discrimination if I'm asking for more females? And I decided not to care because it felt like the right thing to do, not only for the role, but also because I'm just seeing a lot of dudes on this list, and it's like, what else should as a business owner or a decision maker, I guess in your opinion, should you be blind to all that? Is that the ultimate anti-racism, or should you be cognizant and try to be fair and wrestle with it? How
Absolutely.
how I'm not even sure if those are 2 points on a spectrum. This is what's coming to mind.
I think that it's important that we reimagine what fair is, and that we really evaluate what equity is. I've said for a long time that I'm not looking for the equal in equality, right? I'm looking for equity. And equity to me means that you are making sure at every level of your business, upper management, those who make decisions and are influencers, those who are your managers, and those who are your lay people, that there's a spectrum of individuals who represent the community of which you serve. And so if part of, and this is the question that I ask business leaders, if part of your mission and vision is to incorporate equity into your work, then you have to walk what you say, right? And so I don't think it's unfair if part of your mission and vision statement lifts that equity is important to you, for you to then say, you need to, at least I don't, I come in and I do evaluations of businesses, culture and climate all the time. And I say, you really and truly need to think about how you are hiring and retaining more people of color and more women, and figure that piece out. And let's have a conversation about how we can do that. But yeah, I understand. I really and truly do understand the angst and the anxiety from those who don't fit into those categories, right? Do they feel as though their career and position will be put in jeopardy because someone else is coming in? There is this theory that I've been reading and studying for some time now called the replacement theory. And there's this group that has been identified of white men of a certain age who are feeling the angst of the now because they don't have all the answers and they don't know where to go with that energy. And so the automatic response has been, let's attack, let's fight back so that we can hold on to the privilege that we have. And I would offer this: what's wrong with sharing? Like, I'm not going to come in and take what you have in the playground. Think about the sandbox. And I don't want to take what you have. I just want you to share, right? Because there's enough sand in the sandbox for us to all have our little corner in the sandbox.
The sandbox, what this is triggering with me is the paradigm principle perspective of scarcity versus abundance, it seems like. So if you're coming in from a scarcity perspective, that if I give, I will lose,
right?
As opposed to if I give, I know I will also get. And I don't know. I would like to believe that humanity, outside of maybe some of the capitalist doctrine, which is maybe the negative part, is starting to awaken to this. That actually,
I hope
there is such an amazing abundance of money, of resources, of joy, of happiness,
right.
and we don't actually need to take it from someone else and to have it for ourselves. So,
Absolutely.
You did open the door on Ascribe educational consulting, and you're working with companies a lot. So I'd like to walk through the door. And what sort of engagements do you have? Because I looked at the website, and again, that's ascribesuccess.com, and under the services we offer, there's some trainings and other activities. What is it that you do literally for companies, and how does that happen?
So typically how it happens, I've been extremely blessed in my career that I don't have to do a lot of marketing, and I don't have to do a lot of cold calling. And I get word of mouth clients who have already probably vetted me. And when they call, they're probably 90% sure that they're going to hire me to do the job. And so I have an assessment, conversation with them as to where they are, what their expectations, and what kind of outcomes they want to see from this work. I'm very clear that I don't do a lot of one and done trainings. I'm not here to check boxes, cross T's and dot I's. I am here to really change culture and dynamics within organizations. And so what that oftentimes looks like is me organizing some kind of affinity groups. And within those affinity groups, we talk about what are those pain points in the workplace that you've experienced. Is there a collective of individuals who have like experience because of who you are? And people then have to choose, am I going to be in the women's group? Am I going to be in the Black African American, group? Am I going to be in the Latinx group? So that we can identify who we are and then identify some pain points that are indicative of those groups. And then we report back to those who make decisions. And then we have conversations that are very similar to.
So, Sonia, can I jump in on that one? That seems, and I'm going to use the word segregation, but I'm using it in a different word. It seems like you're segregating into not togetherness there.
Right.
Like it feels sort of like wrong.
Right.
But there's clearly a reason why you're saying, well, let's group these people and do something.
Right. And this is just the beginning, and these are very few meetings. We're talking about the majority of my contracts are 1 to 5 years long. And so this is an opportunity for people to feel comfortable in spaces to talk about things that they typically wouldn't talk about. If I were in a room of folks who the majority of time, and I have been, who look like Chris Parker, I would, I have to show up a certain kind of way. I might have to code switch. I might have to put on my professional, hat, and then can't wait to get to my office and close the door and pull down the shades. And then I can kick off my shoes and then take a deep breath. Those are very much realities of people who are in groups like the women's group, the various people of color group, the LGBTQ group. And so we just want to unpack, right? And think about when you're traveling and you unpack. You take out things, and then you do an assessment of, that new house, or that maybe it's a hotel room, and you say, okay, I can see that I'm only going to be here a night, and so I might keep my things in the bag. But if I'm going to be here a week or more, I need to get comfortable, because I don't want to wake up in the middle of the night when I have to go to the bathroom, stub my toe because I didn't get a lay of the place. And that's the analogy that I use, is that we need to unpack. And as we are unpacking, it's about familiarity. And how do we make people most familiar? The goal is to make sure that everyone that an organization hires, they feel like they belong. And so the process of getting there is really and truly having and speaking to people's voice and making sure that folks have agency and that they're comfortable being in the dynamics of the group. And so it's not a matter of taking away from. It's definitely not a scarcity problem in this country, at least. And I would, to say for most countries around the world, that there's not a scarcity problem. It's a distribution of resource problem. And so that's the point that I like to, we bring that information and data back to. We also use surveys. And so we ask questions like, do you feel like your benefits package aligns with who you are culturally and what your needs are as a woman, as a mother, maybe a single mother for your children? Are those things included in your benefits package? And there have been a lot of aha moments. My daughter, she's a social worker, and her job recently have been doing some anti-racism training. And for the first time, she's been there for about a little less than 15 years. They now have personal days that they can take, that when an issue in the world happens, her executive director really wants team members to take a moment and say that this is impacting me personally. And if it's impacting me personally, it can potentially impact my job. And that's what we're talking about. Belonging produces better outcomes for the business.
Belonging, safety is the word that's really coming to my mind. And the question I'm asking, and you specifically used the word equality versus diversity earlier, and I think
equality versus equity.
Well, the question that I have is equal versus same, because and I think this is maybe where it gets a bit hazy for people, that I think a lot of times, in order to try to have something fair, they make it the same for everyone. And what I'm hearing from you is actually have that equity, have that fairness, have that transparency, but it doesn't necessarily need to be the same for everyone, because I think maybe same for everyone is probably based on the needs of Chris Parker, and maybe not other people. Am I getting the
absolutely
spirit of it?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's important, when we're talking about not just racism and implicit biases, when we're talking about disability rights, when we're talking about LGBTQ rights, when we're talking about women's rights, that we understand that there cannot be equality, right? You cannot approach people from a lens of, let me give you equal. If you're talking about, let's say, for example, two people who are of a different height, and you give them the same table and chair, the person who has shorter legs are not going to feel comfortable in that table and chair. And so we have to think of it from those kind of perspectives. If you have someone who requires a wheelchair to get around, the door can't be the same. It can't be of a certain width just because we can walk through it. And so those are equity pieces versus equality pieces. And so I'm not looking for the equal inequality. I'm definitely looking for equity. And diversity is a start to opening the doors to these conversations. Diversity is just a matter of numbers. Do we have people who are showing up who are different, right? But when we are talking about inclusion and equity, we are now talking about, are we including people in the process at different layers? Are we scaling to include? And then if we're talking about equity, how are we best utilizing our talent that we bring to the table?
It all feels good to me that you're doing this work. I'm sitting here just enjoying this thoroughly. We wanted to get to a lesson, if you will. I think you've already been giving some points, and I want to come up with a maybe hypothetical example of a German company that is quite traditional, has a lot of people running around look like Chris, and they have a desire, I think, an authentic desire to improve the diversity.
Right.
And I believe then going down equity as well, but they're starting pretty early day. How can an organization or someone in the organization start this journey? Meaning, you know, what are some smart cuts, or if that can even be done, or some tips to get things going in a simple way?
Absolutely. So I always say start with an acknowledgement. Make sure that the acknowledgement is so that people in community, your all of your employees, your stakeholders, your community, everyone can hear and see and have access to that statement. And so we want to make sure that as you are making those acknowledgement pieces, that you don't make it about self, that you make it about the group and the community that you serve. And so that's the starting point, right? And then secondarily, that we start to look at representation. Where are we pulling talent from? And as we are pulling talent in, how are we welcoming talent into our organization so that they feel that they have agency and voice to actually belong and are productive and they feel welcomed there? So that's step 2. Step 3 is to just really begin to open the door to ideas. I say that we should have shared language and values. If equity is something we value, we need to have the language and the vocabulary to talk like we value equity. And so getting a good grasp within your team around terms like racism, implicit bias, gaslighting, microaggressions, having a clear understanding of what we will tolerate and what the expectations are, right? Because those are 2 different things, because most people who are of the marginalized group, they don't want to be tolerated, but we do all want to have some shared expectations. I do this activity with educators because I would say that 70% of my clients are either colleges and universities, school systems, and things of that nature. And so I do this activity where I give scenarios and I break people into groups, and I'd say, identify what the implicit bias is that's going on here. And it's so funny. It's typically, and we break the groups up as equitable as possible, right? So that we have a little bit of representation. And it's always interesting that either people of color or women say, oh, I've experienced that. And everyone else in the group is oblivious to, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that was a thing. And so those are the simple revelations that we can come to together. We can arrive at understanding things together. And so I try to make my training seminars and sessions with folks very much hands-on. So that people can feel in the moment. Maya Angelou, who's one of my favorite authors, she had this quote, and I'm not saying it verbatim because I don't know it verbatim, but she says something along the line, people won't remember what you said, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And that is so indicative of this work. This is heart work. It's hard work, but it's heart work. And think about the heart. It is the hardest working organ in our body. And when it stops, we stop. And so I also leave people with this. This is our latest slogan for my business is the future is anti-racist. And that literally starts with you. But at the end of the day, I want to offer people this, that because the most marginalized group of people on the face of the earth are people who are of darker skin tone, when Black people win, everyone wins. We are not living in a sense of scarcity. There are enough resources for all of us to eat.
So I was about to start wrapping up, but again, I'm thoroughly enjoying this as a human, and you got my heart going. Words are important to me, and they're very impactful. I'm just curious, why is your slogan anti-racist? Because it even puts racist in the heart of the slogan. And so my bubbly unicorn cloud, like, oh, let's just sugarcoat everything and call, the future is, unicorn farts and clouds. But it seemed like was it a deliberate reason to say, no, we are focusing on this?
Yeah.
Why the specific terminology?
Yeah. Last year, unfortunately, we all globally witnessed the public murder of George Floyd. And so a lot of the asks that I was it was a continual, repetitive, maybe it was different verbiage, but the bottom line of the ask that I was getting from organizations was teach us how to not be racist. And in my mind, it's like, I don't, that's a process, right? And two things have to be at the center and core of that work. And one of them is equity, and the second is humanity. And so if we take personal reflection and assessment of who we are, where we are on the spectrum of where we are with this concept of racism, I, as an individual, am saying, I don't want to lift what it means to be a racist. I don't want to give that power. So we are anti, right? And the future could be 5 minutes from now, it can be tomorrow, it can be a week from now. So we all arrive at different time points. I oftentimes use the analogy of a bus route. The bus route is going to keep on going around. It's going to keep going around. The bus driver is going to say, I got my regulars. They get on. Some are running to the bus, right? They're running because they're running behind and they miss the bus. Others reach in their pocket and they might not have the right change and fare, so they can't get on the bus. And all of one of my favorite songs is Erykah Badu's Bag Lady. And one of the lines in the song is, you gonna miss your bus because you got too much stuff, bag lady, because she's literally carrying these bags. And so that oftentimes is we have so much baggage that we're not ready to get on the bus. But oftentimes there are people who do get on the bus and they don't know when to get off the bus. They don't know that they have gotten enough information on the bus, and they have that fear factor of getting off and taking all the things that they learned on the bus from seeing people from different walks of life and experiences to get out and go into the world and put those things into practice. But the bus is going to continue to come back around. And if you need a refresher, get back on the bus. And so that to me lifts this whole, it puts it into an encapsule of what the future can be anti-racist if we all play our part. And we all have important parts to play. Like literally when I have clients that are Black or people of color, I'm saying that we play a part in this too, right? And then when I have groups that are more white men, for example, right? It's like, there's so much power in this room, you don't realize it. And I need for you to harness it under the umbrella of humanity. And when people take off their personal cloak of this is me and I have to protect me, and instead I have to protect us, it becomes a different conversation. Like, what are those things that are important to you? Okay, we've identified that. Now let's think about those things in people and how we can impact others.
Wow. So with this explicit power that some of us have, it is our human duty to protect us. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's take that away. And the future is anti-racist. And Sonia Lewis is helping us get there. So I'm starting to wrap up. I found this very meaningful. I've been looking forward to this conversation. I hope people are also triggered by it and can contribute, get on the bus and get off when they need. Ascribesuccess.com has lots of information about different programs and I'm reading the Equity Mindset Shift as some sort of 1 hour service, and then there's some courses, and you can do consulting for organizations for multiple years. So ascribesuccess.com. I will also put in the show notes a link to an article that expands on your backstory and your motivation, which I found really beautiful to read. Are there other ways that people can reach out to you or learn more about your work?
Absolutely. We are definitely on social media. So on Facebook and Instagram as Ascribe Success. We are on Twitter as Ascribe Ed, ED. And I just, I'm in community. And so being in community, you see the differences and the needs of others. And that's more important, that I lend my voice and my privilege and my benefits to help those who need to find their agency and voice. Thank you for joining. It's been a pleasure and an education. Thank you so much, Sonia. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite player and download the Simplicity Kit from ebullient.com.